Hi, this is Ted, and for the next hour, you'll be listening to a reading of articles and features from the Monday, July 6th edition of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And we'll start with this one: Greenland, tariffs, NATO, and now soccer. Trump creates a new clash with Europe. This is by Gina Smialek and Ali Watkins. Tensions between the United States and Europe took a new turn on Monday as Belgian officials and European soccer figures expressed outrage over the reinstatement of a banned American player before an evening World Cup game against Belgium. The transatlantic relationship had already been under strain for much of the past year and a half and is poised to face another test just this week as leaders head to Turkey for a closely watched NATO summit. Now, many in Europe are also outraged over what they see as the American president's meddling in soccer. Trump started 2026 with threats to take over Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark, a NATO member, a move that rattled the foundations of the alliance. He has also assailed European leaders over the war in Iran, saying they have not supported the United States in that conflict. His administration has threatened to draw down troops stationed in Europe, which are seen as a critical deterrent to Russia, and he has lashed out at countries he says aren't spending enough on their militaries. European leaders have been hoping to use the NATO summit, which begins on Tuesday, to demonstrate how much more they are spending on their militaries, with the goal of keeping Trump and the U.S. engaged in the military alliance. The stakes are high as Russia increases its attacks on Ukraine, with a strike last week leading to the death of 31 and one on Monday morning that killed at least 12 people. Last week, Trump called the president of FIFA, Gianni Infantino, and asked the association to review the suspension of the top goal scorer in the World Cup for the American team, Folarin Balogun, after he was given a red card banning him from a game, according to people familiar with the conversation. Belgian officials expressed dismay after FIFA, the world soccer governing body, announced on Sunday that it was lifting the one-game suspension against Mr. Balogun. Maxime Prévost, Belgium's foreign minister and a former soccer referee, said in a statement on Monday that the decision might undermine FIFA's expressed commitment to fair play. This decision clearly raises many questions, Mr. Prévost said. If a phone call really is what explains this incomprehensible decision, it would amount to undermining the most basic rules of soccer and sports. The Royal Belgian Football Association said in a statement that it has no alternative but to challenge the players' eligibility for the upcoming match, adding that it was deeply concerned by the process. UEFA, European soccer's governing body, said in a statement that FIFA's reversal had crossed a red line, calling it an unprecedented, incomprehensible, and unjustifiable decision. While the Belgian team has been granted the right to appeal FIFA's decision, there was no guarantee that a ruling would be possible before kickoff on Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The decision by FIFA was highly unusual and a boost to the American team. Mr. Infantino has courted Trump and last year awarded him the first FIFA Peace Prize as the president campaigned but failed to win the Nobel Prize. Speaking at the White House on Monday, Trump confirmed that he had called Infantino to protest the red card and ask for a review. He said that he had watched the game and determined as a sports lover that it wasn't a foul, that it wasn't even an infraction. The president attempted to downplay his intervention, saying that during the conversation with Mr. Infantino, he didn't tell him what to do. I can't tell him what to do, and I don't believe he made the decision, Trump said. I think it was a committee that made the decision, and they made the right decision because, number one, it wasn't a foul, and you want to see a game with your best players. The U.S. ambassador to Belgium, Bill White, defended FIFA's decision in a post on X and said the President Trump would never interfere with the inner workings of FIFA. They're dreaming. A key question is whether the drama will heighten diplomatic tensions and worsen an already challenged relationship between Europe and the US heading into the pivotal week. Mujtaba Rahman, managing director for Europe at the Eurasia Group, said that he didn't think the soccer controversy would be enough to further destabilize the transatlantic relationship. But it does serve as a timely reminder to European governments about how Trump operates, he said in a written response to questions. Unconstrained by rules or norms and the ruthless pursuit of an America First policy in everything he does. Still, European officials who have bitten their tongues throughout situations that they have seen as unacceptable, threats to a sovereign territory, a damaging trade war, may struggle to do so when it comes to a game. When asked for a comment on FIFA's decision, a spokeswoman for Belgium's Prime Minister, Bart de Wever, referred questions to an Instagram post attributed to the Prime Minister's cat. Red card, the post says in Dutch. I'm going to play anyway. Political leaders across Europe are likely to see the soccer situation as yet another example of how the U.S. is a lawless, unconstrained place under Donald Trump, said Jacob van Kierkegaard, an analyst at the Belgian think tank Bruegel. He said that in the longer term, it's likely to make it even harder for leaders on the European right, who had already been distancing themselves from Trump, to align with the American leader. But in the near term, European leaders urgently need Trump's support at the summit in Ankara because Ukraine needs American-made Patriot air defense systems as it fights against Russia. So they will not be picking a fight, he added. And speaking of that summit coming in, that meeting coming in Ankara, Turkey, here's an article called Turkey Hosts NATO Summit While Cracking Down on Critics by Ben Hubbard and Safak Timur. In the weeks before a NATO summit in Turkey begins on Tuesday, the Turkish authorities blocked websites that criticized the military alliance, jailed scores of people for alleged links to terrorism, arrested a comedian who had joked about President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and barred a cruise for gay men from calling at Turkish ports. The leaders of NATO's member states will gather in a country where a court recently ousted the leadership of the main opposition party. The man who is expected to challenge Mr. Erdogan in the next presidential election is jailed on corruption charges widely seen as politically motivated. NATO is, at its core, a military alliance whose members increasingly recognize the role that Turkey could play in its future as concerns grow over the war in Ukraine and Trump's threats to reduce the U.S. role in the organization or withdraw from it altogether. Advocacy groups say that Turkey's newfound importance to NATO has led member states to remain silent as Mr. Erdogan pursues a path toward greater autocracy. Said Emma Sinclair Webb, the Turkey director for Human Rights Watch, Turkey is so much more offside than any other NATO state with respect to democracy and human rights, and that should be a glaring difference for other countries. NATO member state leaders should look over the wall of the palace and see what's going on in the country. The two-day summit in Ankara, the capital, is expected to address the defense budgets and military-industrial capacity of NATO countries. Governance inside member states is not on the meeting's agenda and is unlikely to be discussed publicly, although the preamble of the alliance's founding treaty says that its members are dedicated to the, quote, principles of democracy, individual liberty, and the rule of law. The Turkish government has repeatedly said that its legal system is free from political interference, and Erdogan has said that his political opponents are to blame for their legal troubles. The Turkish authorities did not cite the NATO summit in connection with the wave of arrests, although some of them appeared to be aimed at preventing disturbances during the event. The Ankara prosecutor's office said last month that the police had detained 225 people and that 103 of them had been sent to pretrial detention during a security operation in order to expose the activities of terror organizations around the country. Those detained included members of leftist groups that have staged protests in the past. They also included over a dozen environmental activists, an associate professor of political science at Ankara University, the editor of an LGBTQ magazine, and Deniz Göktaş, a 32-year-old comedian. Mr. Göktaş's routines have taken an edgy approach to politics and religion in Turkey, an overwhelmingly Muslim country, with a constitutionally secular government. In one gag, he muses about Erdogan possibly going to therapy, saying that the president had gone from being a shy dictator to a more at peace with himself dictator. In another, he refers to an incident in 1998 when Erdogan was the mayor of Istanbul. A woman died after Erdogan's elder son, Burak, hit her with his car. Burak Erdogan told prosecutors he was not at fault, and he was acquitted at trial, according to Turkish news reports at the time. Joked Mr. Göktaş, who has been performing since 2023, "My father wouldn't save me from prison if I killed someone in traffic." On Thursday, Mr. Göktaş was detained at Istanbul airport after returning to Turkey. A judge sent him to pre-trial detention on an accusation of insulting the president and instigating hatred in society by mocking religion. Turkey's government has also blocked access to websites that were critical of NATO and the summit, according to Engeli Web, a monitoring group. A number of Turkish journalists, including many who had covered previous NATO summits in other countries, said they had been denied accreditation for this one. In a statement, a NATO spokesperson said the alliance relies on the host nation to provide assessments on journalists from their country to ensure access to the meeting site. And last week, a cruise planner that had organized a trip oriented toward gay men was told its ship would not be allowed to dock in Turkey. Rich Campbell, the CEO of Atlantis, the organizer, said in an interview, Patti LuPone, who was scheduled to perform on the cruise, said on social media that she was furious. Turkey does not criminalize homosexuality, but Erdogan's government has taken an increasingly hard line on LGBTQ issues, including banning pride parades. The governor of Turkey's Aydin province said in a statement ahead of the cruise's start that it had been organized by groups known for behaviors that do not align with the structure of our society and our moral values, and that it was absolutely out of the question for the ship to dock in the province. A stop in Istanbul was also canceled, Mr. Campbell said. The Istanbul governor's office also shut down an Istanbul gay bar that had invited the passengers to visit, citing unspecified practices against regulations. Mr. Campbell said that his company had brought similar cruises to Turkey 13 times before without issue. Our guests are there for the same reason as any other tourist, he said. We're not there in a gay pride rally or march or for political reasons ever. And here's something you won't hear on the evening news. An email, a knock at the door. A suit alleges a threat to free speech. This is by David Andreatta. The chain of events began in January when David Strever sent an email to the acting director of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, after 2 demonstrators had been shot to death in Minneapolis. Subject line, what next? The email called the agency's acting director a monstrous human being, compared him to a Nazi official, and said that he would be tormented by his conscience. Then in June, there was a knock at the door of Mr. Strever's home in Rochester, New York. Federal agents had come with a written warning that said Mr. Strever may have violated a law against threatening a federal law enforcement officer. Now a free speech watchdog is suing the Trump administration, arguing that the agent's actions amounted to unconstitutional retaliation for protected speech and were intended to intimidate Mr. Strever into withholding his criticism of federal immigration policy. The lawsuit, filed Monday in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia, names as defendants Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin, the acting director of ICE, David Venturella, and the agents involved in the investigation into Mr. Strever. It asks the court to declare their conduct a constitutional violation and to prohibit similar violations. Our Constitution does not tolerate such a brazen abuse of authority, the lawsuit said. It was filed by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Quick pause. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. The case arises from an episode that has drawn national attention and intensified concerns among civil liberties advocates about the government's response to criticism. Mr. Striever, 45, was on a trip to Finland with his 7-year-old daughter on June 23rd when two investigators from the Department of Homeland Security visited his home and presented his wife with a document for her husband that read, "Warning notice, and you may be in violation of federal law." It said that the email Mr. Striever had sent to Todd Lyons, who was the acting ICE director at the time, may have constituted a threat. 2 days later, a third agent attempted to intercept Striever at a New York City hotel where he and his daughter were staying after returning to the United States. When you have federal agents showing up at your home, confronting your wife, tracking you to a hotel with your daughter, that's more than enough to send the message that you should shut up, said Adam Steinbaugh, a lawyer at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. The Department of Homeland Security, the parent agency of ICE, issued a statement in response to questions about its warning notices and the lawsuit, and said that the agency investigates all credible threats towards its employees and officers, including threats to the ICE director. As a matter of policy, we do not comment on any ongoing investigations, the statement said. Mr. Striever, a former journalist who works in the tech industry, sent his email to Mr. Lyons after the immigration crackdown in Minneapolis and the fatal shootings of two demonstrators, Renee Good and Alex Pretty, by federal officers. The email, which is included in full in the lawsuit filed on Monday, said that Mr. Lyons will never know peace and that he will go down in history as America's Reinhard Heydrich, the butcher, of reference to the Nazi security chief considered to be a principal architect of the Holocaust. Even Trump will turn on you before the end, and you will be a sad, despised man who eats himself alive with shame at your own pathetic weakness, the email read. You will seek to lose yourself to escape the burden of knowing the truth about yourself. But wherever you go, you will find yourself. You will torment yourself until your last day on earth. Mr. Steinbaugh cast the email as a moral condemnation. This is pleading with a government official to listen to his conscience and warning that his conscience is not going to give him peace in the future, he said. That's a rhetorical appeal. That's not a threat. The warning letter from the Department of Homeland Security invited Mr. Striever to contact the agency, but he has no intention of doing so, his lawyer said. Nathan Wessler, the deputy director of the American Civil Liberties Union's Speech, Privacy, and Technology Project, criticized the government's warning notice as an intimidation tactic. Sending a frustrated or even intemperate email to a federal official is at the core of what the First Amendment protects, he said. The lawsuit references what it cites as other recent instances of the immigration agency seeking to suppress protected speech. One involved the same agents who visited Mr. Striever's home, issuing a similar warning the same day to a poll worker in Syracuse, about an hour's drive from Rochester. Paige Lynn Gonier was working at a voting location in a library during New York's primary election when the agents arrived. Ms. Gonier said that she believed her warning stemmed from a post she had made on social media in January, in which she posted a photo of Jonathan Ross, the ICE officer who shot Ms. Good, and wrote, "I think today is a great day for Jonathan to be indicted." A Department of Homeland Security spokeswoman, however, shared an image of a different social media post with the Associated Press that the agency attributed to Ms. Gonier and that contained Mr. Ross's home address. The spokeswoman said the post was evidence of doxing, the posting of personal information online without consent. The interactions between the agents and Mr. Striever and Ms. Gonier were first reported by Syracuse.com. Ms. Gonier declined to discuss her social media posts when reached by the Times and said that she was pursuing legal options. "I think this was done as an intimidation tactic," she said. And here's an article called "Gas Stations Gain When Oil Prices Start to Drop" by Lydia DePillis. As tankers start sailing again through the Strait of Hormuz, Oil prices have fallen nearly to their level before fighting blocked off the Persian Gulf 4 months ago. As usual for a so-called supply shock, prices at the pump aren't falling as quickly as gasoline retailers take the opportunity to recoup some of the profits they lost as prices rose. Trump isn't having it. The retailers must quickly react to this statement and do what they know is right. Drop your price for our great American people, he wrote in a social media post last week. He said he wouldn't stand for price gouging, which is totally illegal. It's not the first time a president has warned against price gouging when the politically sensitive price of gas soured public sentiment. President Joseph Biden sounded very similar in 2022 when Russia's invasion of Ukraine sent energy prices soaring. So, do they have a point? In some ways, yes. The difference between what retailers pay for wholesale gasoline and what they charge drivers has been widening over the past decade, from around 20 cents a gallon to about 40 cents, according to data collected by Dow Jones's Oil Price Information Service. Although much of that can be chalked up to their own rising costs, industry experts say there is likely a component of extra profit. It's inflation, but it's also opportunity, said Tom Closa, chief energy advisor for Gulf Oil. This is especially true for high-volume, fast-growing chains like Wawa and Buc-ee's, which can buy fuel in bulk for less than the independent store owners who make up more than half the industry. The economies of scale just work wonderfully for them, said Mr. Closa. Retail gasoline margins took their last big step up in 2022 as prices topped $5 a gallon. Other costs like wages, insurance, and rent were rising steeply as well, increasing the overhead required to provide that gasoline. Retailers charged accordingly, and those costs have generally not gone down. Gasoline price spikes also tend to push consumers toward loyalty cards, which offer a few cents off per gallon. According to surveys by Upside, which itself offers discounts for new customers, nearly half of drivers say they regularly use such programs. That may prompt retailers to keep posted prices a little higher, since frequent drivers use loyalty points to take the edge off their bills. Said Thomas Weinandy, Upside's chief economist, when we're talking about margin per gallon, that's assuming the sign price is what people are actually paying. But that's becoming more and more a sticker price rather than the actual paid price. The latest period of elevated prices comes with an additional quality that plays to the strengths of large chains: volatility. When prices move up and down rapidly, consumers have little sense of what seems fair, and companies can keep prices high even when costs drop. Just ask Casey's General Stores, the publicly traded group of Midwest gas stations that also prides itself on its pizza, which I assume also give gas. The company posted a margin of 46.9 cents per gallon on fuel in the quarter that ended April 30th, up 9.3 cents from the same quarter last year, and contributing to a 29% increase in gross profits from fuel. It was just a little more volatile on the way up relative to the experience we've had in the past, and that enabled us to capture a bit more margin than we might have otherwise, said the company's chief executive on an earnings call last month. Independent stations face the same price pressures with fewer methods of managing them, another executive noted, leaving little reason to give up their own margins. Murphy Oil also posted a strong quarter and noted that volatility helped its bottom line, as did Sunoco, which emphasized its ability to shift supply networks as different sources and delivery routes changed in price. That's not always a bad thing. In fact, in our world, a lot of times that can mean value creation, said Sunoco's chief operating officer. Margins compress as prices rise, but widen even more as they come down. I'd say you get an overall kind of net bullish margin environment, Mr. Fales said. There might be one more thing going on. Gasoline retailers have for decades used digital platforms to analyze the marketplace and figure out how to set their prices. Earlier versions of the software required the user to manually program how prices should respond to trends, such as a demand increase over Thanksgiving weekend. These are the rules that have existed for a long time, said Daniel Ershoff, an economist at University College London. The difference now is you have much more sophisticated algorithms that learn stuff a lot faster and incorporate a lot more information. Mr. Urshoff studied the use of algorithmic pricing services in Germany, where data is more easily available to researchers. He and his co-authors found that the use of such services pushed up prices even in superficially competitive markets, possibly because the algorithms learned to tacitly collude to avoid price wars. One of the most widely used pricing platforms in Europe and North America is called Calibrate, which says 15 of the top 20 fuel retailers in the United States use its services. 2 years ago, the Canadian Competition Bureau opened an inquiry into the company, aiming to assess whether it was allowing gas stations to collectively raise prices. American antitrust watchdogs haven't followed suit. But last month, a team of lawyers, including some who have recently left the Federal Trade Commission, filed a lawsuit claiming that Calibrate provides the central nervous system for a conspiracy to extinguish retail price competition among gas stations. The case was brought in California for two reasons. One, the state has notoriously high gasoline prices that cannot be entirely explained by known factors, including taxes, regulations, and a lack of refining capability. A state commission determined last year that this mystery surcharge was due in part to higher profit margins across the gasoline supply chain, which is also relatively consolidated and vertically integrated from refiners to retailers. And two, just last year, California tweaked its competition statute to clarify that pricing algorithms that share data across firms qualify as illegal coordination. That lowers the bar for success for cases like this, which have not all fared well in federal courts. It's difficult to prove anti-competitive behavior if companies can plausibly deny that they got together to conspire. I think this one pretty clearly reflects some lessons learned from how those previous cases have gone, said John Newman, a law professor at University of Memphis, who worked at the FTC when it brought those suits. When you step back, it's kind of absurd to say, oh, if you only did the common scheme 90% of the time, there was no agreement at all. That's not how antitrust is supposed to work. The case, of course, will take years to wind through the courts if it isn't tossed out. In the meantime, experts are betting that the relatively low gas prices of early 2026 aren't coming back, despite the president's exhortation. You get these big spikes, it resets, but it usually resets back to a level that is above where it was before the spike, said Bobby Griffin, managing director of specialty retail at Raymond James. And here's a story about Ukraine. Ukraine remade air defense, but Russia has changed its attacks. By Siobhan O'Grady and Lyubov Sholutko. Ukrainian troops returned home from training in the United States and Germany 3 years ago, adept at the standard way of using the Patriot system so critical to air defenses. But with limited supplies and nonstop Russian barrages, they quickly realized that they would need to rewrite the rules. So the Ukrainians started to experiment. For example, each battery or firing unit in the mobile surface-to-air Patriot defense system holds interceptors that are launched to stop ballistic missiles midair before they crash into the earth. The Ukrainians learned to often fire just one interceptor at incoming ballistic missiles instead of the usual two or more because of shortages of the expensive American-made weapons. They also set the Patriots to manual mode to avoid automatic firing on targets like slow-moving, inexpensive drones that could be taken down by other means. They learned to shoot down drones with machine guns operated from rooftops, truck beds, and helicopters, and more recently with interceptor drones that can take down the Russian drones mid-flight. Ukrainian forces largely reserved the Patriots for trying to stop only the fastest-moving ballistic missiles. These tactics, described in interviews with Ukrainian air defense commanders and experts, were once viewed as the last resort of a scrappy military with limited resources. But such adaptation is increasingly important as Ukrainian cities face an onslaught of barrages from Russia, as they did with an attack on Monday. The evolution of tactics is also becoming an essential battlefield model, as the war in Iran and the attacks in the Gulf have drained global supplies of the most advanced Patriot interceptors. Ukrainian soldiers have already deployed to the Gulf to train local troops on cheaper and more effective tactics to intercept drones. And you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Said Vyacheslav Akhayev, the commander of a Patriot unit in Ukraine, we initially used the tactics and the knowledge that we had been taught in America. Once combat use began, he said, Ukrainians realized they had to introduce some of our own experience and skills and slightly change the tactics of employment, moving away from the templates that we had been taught in the United States. Other tactics the Ukrainians have adopted include learning to shoot and scoot, quickly moving the batteries after firing to prevent Russia from targeting them in counterstrikes. They also employ deception to lure Russian fire away, hiding their real Patriot batteries under camouflage while producing realistic decoys that run just $30,000 apiece. A fully loaded Patriot system is worth roughly $1 billion. Several countries have also reached out to Ukraine requesting exports of Patriot decoys, according to a leading manufacturer of the devices, who spoke on the condition of anonymity because his factories are top Russian targets. Despite the innovations, the Ukrainian approach is far from enough to keep the country from being hammered by Russian missiles and drones. Russia regularly launches barrages of various types of missiles and drones that overwhelm Ukraine's exhausted, overworked, and dangerously undersupplied air defense operators. In particular, Moscow has ramped up production of ballistic missiles. Ballistic missiles move much faster than cruise missiles, and Patriots are the only air defense system in Ukraine's arsenal that can shoot them down. Ukraine has other air defense systems that can intercept cruise missiles. In an attack early on Monday that killed at least 12 people, Russia launched 68 missiles and 351 drones into Ukraine, according to Ukraine's Air Force. None of the 23 ballistic missiles were intercepted, but most of the cruise missiles were. In another overnight attack last Wednesday, at least 30 people were killed in Kyiv, Ukraine, including many buried when an apartment building was struck. Ukraine intercepted just 4 of the 24 ballistic missiles in that salvo. So far this year, Russia has launched 521 ballistic missiles at Ukraine, more than twice as many as in the same period in 2025. Ukraine has knocked down 164 of them, according to a New York Times data set based on numbers from Ukraine's Air Force. While other countries make various interceptor systems, the Patriot and its most advanced interceptor missile, the PAC-3, are in short supply globally. Ukraine does not disclose its remaining stockpile, but it struggles to intercept most ballistics, and its urgent pleas for new shipments of interceptors suggest the remaining supply is low. In the aftermath of recent Russian attacks, President Zelensky of Ukraine has pleaded for the U.S. to fast-track a request for a production license that would allow Kyiv to build more Patriot batteries and interceptors at home. The U.S. owns the right to the technology, and other countries cannot replicate the design without approval. For now, Germany and Japan are the only other 2 countries that have permission to build the systems. The most advanced radar seekers are currently made only in the United States. Speeding up production by allowing Kyiv to build the critical components, Mr. Zelensky said, would also help Washington gain access to supplies for itself whenever needed. Mr. Akhayev, the commander, was awarded Ukraine's highest honor for shooting down the first ballistic missile with a Patriot in 2023, proving the system's effectiveness in combat. But the launchers sometimes sit half empty or worse. Only a slow trickle enters Ukraine through a program under which European partners buy supplies from the U.S. and then transfer them to Kyiv. Ukrainian operators are forced to ration their supplies even more than usual and make risky decisions a better supplied military could avoid. Ukraine is designing its own air defense systems, which are not likely to be as effective as Patriots, yet could at least offer some additional protection. But rolling out those weapons will take time, and in the interim, Russian attacks will most certainly continue. Civilians are dying. Entire families are being killed, Mr. Ahayev said. We need more missiles. We need these missiles as much as we need air. And now we'll go to some editorials. This is by Bill Saporito, and it's called Trump Wins the FIFA Appease Prize. Is it fair to say, let me start over. Is it fair that players live in one reality and referees live in another? Is it fair that Trump can impose his own reality on both? In professional soccer, as in other sports, the evolution of technology has set a new standard for refereeing. That standard is perfection. And of course, soccer is failing at it. How could it not? The introduction of video assistant referee has made some decisions easier, like handballs, for instance. But it has also injected another level of uncertainty and ambiguity that is counterproductive to the rhythm of the game. And in the hands of the FIFA boss, Gianni Infantino, and Trump, it is counterproductive to the integrity of the game itself. The U.S. forward, Folarin Balogun, had faced automatic suspension for a red card that had been confirmed by VAR. After taking a phone call from the president in which Trump asked for a review of that suspension, Mr. Infantino found a way to restore the player's eligibility for today's knockout match against Belgium. The Royal Belgium Football Association said it was astonished by FIFA's decision. There's plenty of astonishment in this World Cup thanks to VAR. In the Portugal-Croatia match, Croatia's late goal was ruled out for offside because a chip in the ball detected contact from a Croatian player that no human could have possibly discerned. Iran, already put at a disadvantage by the U.S. government by travel restrictions that hindered its match preparations, failed to advance to the knockout round after technology ruled out a goal it had scored against Egypt in the 93rd minute. It was a call that seemed almost deliberately cruel, or just deliberate, if you ask the Iranians. Then there's the U.S. versus Bosnia and Herzegovina match in which Mr. Balogun was red carded for a foul that the on-field referee clearly believed was no big deal, and the VAR crew decided was a capital crime, or at least worth a one-game suspension. The decision, after further review, was that the American forward had somehow decided to hack his Bosnian opponent while falling backward and trying to find his own balance. Neither player appeared to think it any more than a random encounter, and fans worldwide have howled that an even worse transgression by the Argentine soccer deity Lionel Messi went unpunished by Argent FIFA. Nevertheless, the VAR prevailed and the American got his marching orders. It was, and you can apply the discount of my being an American, an outrageous call. A wrong call. This happens all the time in any sport. There are times in the amateur league in which I coach when a ref wrongly decides to award the ball to our opponent for a throw-in, and one of my players will shout, "But it went out off of them." My response is typically, and your point is, errors happen, get on with it. According to soccer's rules, as interpreted by most people who actually understand them, the red card decision against Mr. Balogun might have been wrong, but it should also not have been reversible. That is, until Trump called Infantino and suggested that the rule of law in soccer, just like the rule of law in the U.S., doesn't apply to him. According to the rarely used Article 27, which allows FIFA to suspend a disciplinary measure, the incorrect ruling that could not be corrected was in fact correctable. Last November, when Portugal's Cristiano Ronaldo received a red card for elbowing an Irish player, FIFA's disciplinary committee rolled it back to a one-year probationary period, which allowed Mr. Ronaldo to play in the first round of the tournament. It was more superstar submission. Trump, of course, bragged about beating the charges and getting Mr. Balogun back for the critical knockout match against Belgium in Seattle. Mr. Balogun, it should be noted, is a Brooklyn-born player who was raised in England and plays in France for AC Monaco. He's an American citizen by birthright, the kind of person targeted by the case the president lost last week in the Supreme Court. We're the fools to think that Mr. Infantino, a supposed reformer after the scandal-filled regime of his predecessor, Sepp Blatter, would make FIFA more above board. His organization has handed soccer's biggest tournament to both Vladimir Putin's Russia and the pet petropotentates of Qatar, and he has turned the whole thing into an ever more gigantic money machine. He presented Trump with the first FIFA Peace Prize, after all. Nearly 3 months later, of course, the Peace Prize winner would be starting a war with Iran by bombing school children. A friend noted that he has now won the FIFA Peace Prize, too. This is a very good American team playing in what has been, to this point, a wildly successful, fairly played tournament. We can compete with just about anyone, although it's also fair to say that we're still not part of the elite, the way Belgium is. A victory over Belgium would indeed be a measure of achievement, another mile marker passed on the journey of progress the sport has made in the United States, and perhaps one forever tarnished by our commander-in-chief. And here is an opinion piece by Frank Bruni, The Bling and Brutality of American, quotation marks, diplomacy. How do we want the world to see us? Which of our nation's traits do we highlight? As a show of our strengths, as an assertion of our values, as an act of self-definition? In the past, we answered that question by helping to rebuild Europe after World War II, by tackling the scourge of AIDS in Africa, by sharing our trailblazing scientific advances, and by tapping our extraordinary wealth. President Trump is answering it with brutes in cages, beating each other to pulps. I don't mean the desecration of the White House on his 80th birthday last month, when he and members of his cabinet cheered the chokeholds, body slams, and bloodshed of Ultimate Fighting Championship matches on the South Lawn. Or at least I don't mean only that. Less widely noted than that national disgrace was an agreement between the UFC and the Trump administration to promote such pummeling abroad. You read that right. The American government is giving its imprimatur, perhaps I should say lending its muscle, to the international expansion of human cockfighting. An earlier generation had the Marshall Plan. Ours has mixed martial arts. The administration is calling the arrangement sports diplomacy, and there are images of Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Dana White, UFC's chief executive officer, holding up a memorandum of understanding at the State Department on June 11th. They're smiling, as if they accomplished something important, as if there were a global barbarism deficit, and the United States is nobly stepping up to fill the void, as if an important emblem of human civilization and expression of human culture will finally get the recognition it deserves, as if the torch of liberty can now shine brighter than ever because it will be carried by warriors of such vision and valor that one of them, upon winning his South Lawn brawl, used his moment at the mic to crow a cuckoo credo: Michelle Obama is a man. It's something we want to share with the world, Rubio said during his photo opportunity with White, referring to mixed martial arts. He called it one of those few things we have left in our country, and I would say in the world, that brings so many, that brings so many different places, that brings so many people from so many different places, so many different backgrounds, and so many different points of view together. That rationale was a crucial reassurance. Otherwise, a skeptic might wonder if Trump was simply setting up UFC's parent company, in which he's invested, for ever greater profits. But thanks to Rubio, I now understand that there's no self-enrichment here, no conflict of interest, just cage fighting as kumbaya. The arrangement with the UFC isn't novel. Our government has engaged in sports diplomacy before. It has collaborated, for example, with the National Football League to advertise professional football, which itself is plenty violent and hardly the ideal expression and embodiment of American virtues. Maybe I'm kidding myself to see a difference between a quarterback being sacked and a wrestler being punched in the ribs, kicked in the head, and subjected to a guillotine choke, but I do. And I cringe at our government's advancement of such savagery while we're retreating from the kinds of engagements that lessen hardship and relieve misery. Near the start of his current term in the presidency, Trump quickly and gleefully dissolved the U.S. Agency for International Development. Whatever that organization's inefficiencies and excesses, it did vital, life-saving work that proclaimed concern for the welfare of needy people beyond our borders. The president didn't replace the agency's programs with better ones. He essentially said that America was exhausted with such altruism, tired of being saps and chumps, and he rechanneled our treasure toward new munitions and new monuments, baubles, and bling. Trump's visions of American might are either gaudy or, in the case of UFC matches, grotesque. Cage fighting fits perfectly into his rejection of anything that codes as elitist. Out with the Kennedy Center, in with the Octagon. So much for symphonies, bring on the gladiators. Who needs discernment when you can flex domination? That's Trump's message to the world. That's his thinking, the limits of which have been exposed by his ongoing capitulation to a smaller, poorer, less brawny country with control over the Strait of Hormuz. Perhaps he should have foregone the war with Iran and simply staged a cage fight in Tehran. Such sports diplomacy would have been a whole lot less expensive, and while it would have been an embarrassing illustration of America's passions and priorities under this president, it would also have been an honest one. And you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, and some letters to the editor. In response to the article, Trump businesses reaped $2 billion 2025 filing show, a reader from Brooklyn writes, President Trump and his family's $2.2 billion windfall during the first year of his second term is further evidence that he is more concerned about making his own bank account great again than about the millions of Americans across the country struggling to pay for essentials such as food, health care, and fuel. There is something almost sickening about the unabashed, bold levels of gluttonous grifting that so many of his followers seemingly ignore or excuse as the natural behavior of a business person. Eventually, more Americans will sour on the fact that Trump is using his position to fatten his and his family's pocketbooks. Hopefully, there will be investigations as more curtains are raised, revealing what could prove to be even more questionable behavior. Even at this point, this administration appears to be one of the most unethical in American history. And someone from San Francisco writes, one wonders how a man who campaigned on draining the swamp if he was elected can claim that he is fighting the good fight when he and his family make $2 billion in the process. Given this windfall, it's no surprise that he called the recent bipartisan housing bill a big yawn. To an article called Crypto Windfall for Trump, but not for most investors, in which it pointed out that while Trump has made so much money from crypto, the people who invested with him have lost fortunes. It should come as no surprise that hundreds of investors made vast amounts of money, the same as wealthy buddies cash in on the presidency. A government leader should be able to influence a decision in a sport. We would protest if another nation did it. This stains our great team and our national sense of fairness, an exercise of power that should be announced by commissioners and leaders in all sports. It is a mark of shame for a good team and a great player. And weekend. And here's a letter about, in case you hadn't heard, some singer named Taylor Swift got married this weekend to some football player. And this letter writer from New York writes, at almost twice the age of Tay-Tay, I am hardly a typical friendship bracelet trading Eras Tour pilgrimaging Swiftie. But I am a fan of many of her songs and I appreciate her business acumen, humor, intelligence, and just plain sense of fun. She's a powerful, positive, and relatable role model for her younger followers. She gives generous gifts and donations to deserving employees and organizations. And whatever expense her wedding entailed, she and Travis Kelce could easily afford it, unlike many couples whose lavish affairs end up putting them in debt. It seems petty, let alone pointless, to criticize her selection of partner and celebration location. Feminism is about women making their own choices without judging the choices of others. I got married on my aunt and uncle's lawn. I imagine Taylor is okay with that. And about rich political donors. Someone from Columbus, Ohio writes, In his majority opinion justifying unlimited political party spending in aid of candidates, Justice Brett Kavanaugh wrote, all political parties and candidates going forward can compete equally under the same rules. What he didn't mention is that according to Open Secrets, not one of the top five 2023-2024 American political donors gave to Democrats. As ordinary Americans struggle with health care costs and millions suffer from record heat, the party of big oil, science denial, and tax cuts for billionaires will now have equal footing with the party that gave us the Affordable Care Act and U.S. leadership in the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement, a treaty that Trump abandoned. Justice Kavanaugh's words remind me of a quote from Anatole France. The law, in its majestic equality, forbids the rich and the poor alike to sleep under bridges, to beg in the streets, and to steal bread. And here's an editorial by Robin Given called, now the screen won't change, Trump ruined the 4th of July for me. When it comes to patriotism, Americans have never been a subtle lot. We love big flags, giant barbecues, and a God and country themed diorama, beer cozy, or pet costume. We cheer fighter jets trailing red, white, and blue smoke. We love a marching band. Every year, all over this country on July 4th, we turn gorging on hot dogs into a form of competitive love for our country as we salute our nation's independence from a king. It used to be that the holiday brought out dad jeans and crop tops, and everyone looked slightly embarrassing, but the atmosphere was good-hearted and welcoming. It was kitsch and it was silly, but it also left me feeling exhilarated and proud, especially in Washington, where I first moved over 30 years ago to work for the Washington Post. The city revealed itself as an often inefficient but also idealistic place, filled with ambitious overachievers who chose public service instead of the riches of Wall Street or Silicon Valley. In particular, the women I met and began to call my friends were accomplished in fields I could barely comprehend: counterterrorism, international aid and development, and world banking. During one of my early summers here, a friend who was reporting on the Clinton White House invited me to be her plus one to watch the 4th of July fireworks from the White House grounds. The explosion of color was glorious. Wherever you might have perched to watch the fireworks, seeing them over the nation's capital was special. Not because the show was immense, but because it was here. There's nothing like watching red, white, and blue rockets and sparklers against the backdrop of the White House, the Washington Monument, and the National Mall. It's again the 4th of July, this one the zenith in a year-long celebration of the nation's 250th birthday. Familiar red, white, and blue bunting hangs from the windows of Washington's monumental federal buildings as well as its charming row houses. Flags the size of lap poles drape entire structures, and visitors to the Capitol wrap themselves in the equivalent of the Star-Spangled Banner. The usual flurry of tourists has grown into a cartoonish display of holiday visitors, one-upping one another with T-shirts that scream USA. But this year I can barely tolerate the sight of red, white, and blue. When combined into a maximalist display of nationalist cheerleading, the colors make my heart ache. The flags on federal buildings are grand, but they hang alongside banners featuring Trump's scowling face. He spent the better part of the spring focused on cleaning and repairing long dormant fountains in some of Washington's grandest circles and parks. The white granite sculpture, once the color of a dirty ashtray, now gleams. It's a wonder to see water dance in a fountain that's been dry for nearly 20 years. But that pleasure comes with the knowledge that the repairs were orchestrated by an administration that sees itself more as a regime than as a caretaker of democracy. The breezy image of American flag blue has become associated with the smelly, swampy mess that he has made of the once elegant but temperamental reflecting pool. It's now fenced off like so much else in Washington right now. And just a few weeks ago, the president held an ultimate fighting championship on the South Lawn for his birthday, turning the stately public rooms of the White House into a glorified locker room. All of this is in service to a single man's vision of America. The aesthetics of patriotism in the nation's capital no longer involve picnic baskets, overstuffed coolers, and LL Bean canvas tote bags. Gone is the aspirational truth that all are welcome to come to the nation's backyard. Friends, family, and new arrivals, too. When people assemble in the National Mall to watch the fireworks, the spectacle will be designated a national special security event, akin to an inauguration. With the heightened vigilance, visitors will have to bring government-issued identification and pass through metal detectors. The Secret Service has forbidden coolers and lawn chairs and frisbees. We may not have a traditional dress other than jeans and a t-shirt, but we now have a tradition of toting our belongings to public events in clear plastic bags, snapping photographs of our most beautiful monuments through a maze of non-scalable fencing, and being greeted at almost every corner by an all-hands security presence that includes U.S. Marshals, Park Police, Metropolitan Police, Drug Enforcement Administration officers, Secret Service, and the National Guard. Even the dogs are on patrol. It might be tempting to say that these are unusual circumstances, rare events, but this is what Washington looks like even on quiet days. The barricades don't all go away. Those that remain are cracked open just a smidge for grudging passage, but they can be slammed shut at a moment's notice. I want to delight in the sights and sounds of fireworks over the nation's capital the same way I did when I first came to Washington, the way that I did just a few years ago, the way I hope to again someday. And you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 6th New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. This is Ted. I had to skip a lot of articles because so many of them were about soccer, football, whatever you want to call it. But I hope you enjoyed this. I enjoyed doing it. And I look forward to speaking with you again next week. Thank you for listening. Bye.